So last week I did a video on the possible benefits of having healthy DHT levels, and aside from the benefits and the possible benefits of DHT to things like cognition and mood as well as libido and sexual function, it is fairly well established that DHT plays a significant role in male pattern baldness. And so essentially what I want to do in this video is talk about ways to prevent DHT from doing this. Now, aside from DHT, there are a handful of other hormonal and metabolic pathways that do influence male pattern baldness, things like estrogen and inflammation, as well as IGF-1 and thyroid hormones, as well as cortisol, prolactin, and genetics. And aside from DHT, genetics does appear to be the most widely accepted influencing factor when it comes to male pattern baldness. Men that are positive for a very specific hair growth and androgen receptor gene do appear to be at a much higher risk of male pattern baldness. However, when you consider that there are other strong correlations of male pattern baldness with things like obesity and insulin resistance, heart disease, and aging, it does appear that lifestyle factors can play a large role in the risk of developing male pattern baldness. And the reason I say this is that things like obesity and insulin resistance, as well as heart disease, are largely determined by lifestyle choices, not genetics. Now, granted, there is a very large genetic component to this. However, I find it very unlikely that the same genetics that predispose somebody to, say, something like insulin resistance are the same genetic predispositions that predispose somebody to something like male pattern baldness. It seems much more likely that the lifestyle choices that are leading to insulin resistance and heart disease and obesity are also the same lifestyle choices that are leading to male pattern baldness, or at least predisposing an individual to male pattern baldness. However, the big question is, how are these lifestyle factors leading to an increase in the risk of male pattern baldness? And I think the answer to this question is reductions in testosterone levels, which is the first way to optimize and to prevent male pattern baldness, which is just to simply optimize testosterone levels. Now, when you look at conditions such as insulin resistance and heart disease, as well as obesity, not only are they strongly associated with male pattern baldness, but they are also strongly associated with low testosterone levels. Now, the obvious question here is, how is it that low testosterone levels could lead to an increase in the risk of male pattern baldness if it's actually an increase in androgens and an increase in DHT in the scalp? And to answer this question, I want to look at this study right here. However, before we dive into the study, I do want to give a huge shout out to today's video sponsor, Element. Now, one of the best things that you can do for your overall health as well as your hormonal health is to simply prioritize nutrient intake. And as it turns out, electrolytes tend to be a very overlooked nutrient when it comes to optimizing a diet for nutrient intake, and this is where Element comes in. Element is a perfect blend of sodium, potassium, and magnesium that is optimally formulated to help meet your electrolyte needs. And honestly, until about a year ago, I really didn't even understand how big of a difference drinking something like an electrolyte mix like Element would make during my workouts. Now, it also doesn't hurt that Element tastes amazing and has a super clean ingredient list, and what's more is that they are currently offering you guys a free sample pack of Element with any purchase. So make sure to follow the link down below in the description, or go to drinkelement.com/nutrition library to snag this offer. Now, this study right here, in reference to the association between the risk of low testosterone and the risk of male pattern baldness, is actually performed in patients with benign prostate hyperplasia. Now, this might seem a little bit off topic. However, I do think it is handy to look at benign prostate hyperplasia and male pattern baldness in conjunction, simply because they have extremely similar pathologies. Both conditions are associated with a increase in localized DHT and androgen production, and are both strongly associated to each other. Now, in this study, the researchers concluded two primary things worth mentioning. One is that benign prostate hyperplasia is associated not with high testosterone levels, as you would assume, but with low testosterone levels, similar to how male pattern baldness appears to be associated with low testosterone. And the second thing worth noting is that the reason they give for this is because of an increase in intraprostatic DHT levels. and androgen receptor density in response to low testosterone. And so what appears to be going on here is that when the body detects a decrease in testosterone levels, that it begins to increase the expression of androgen receptors and 5-alpha reductase in the peripheral tissues as a means to maintain androgen signaling in the absence of testosterone. Now, the benefit of this is that it will help to maintain androgen signaling in the peripheral tissues in the absence of testosterone. However, the negative of this is that in specific tissues like the prostate and the scalp, it can actually cause things like benign prostate hyperplasia and male pattern baldness, which obviously is not a good thing. And this could partially explain why typically you see lower levels of androgens in the blood in men that have male pattern baldness. But on the flip side of that, you also see higher levels of androgens in the scalp tissue. And this could also explain why certain men that are positive for specific androgen receptor genes are actually more prone to this reaction. In these men that have these specific genetic predispositions, when these men in particular experience a drop in testosterone levels, they may be prone to this overexpression of androgen receptors and an overexpression of 5-alpha reductase, specifically in the scalp, that eventually ends up leading to male pattern baldness. And anecdotally, this is typically what you actually see. Testosterone levels typically peak around 20 years of age and then begin to gradually decline after that point. And this is typically when signs of male pattern baldness really become evident in certain individuals. And this could be because of that initial decline in testosterone levels that begins to initiate the overexpression of androgen receptors and the overexpression of 5-alpha reductase in the scalp that again eventually leads to male pattern baldness. And so I say all of this to just simply say that one of the primary ways to prevent male pattern baldness may just to simply be to keep track of your testosterone levels and to leverage any means necessary to optimize your testosterone levels to prevent this overexpression of androgen receptors and overexpression of 5-alpha reductase in the scalp. Now, the topic of how to optimize testosterone levels is much too vast to cover in this video. However, I do have a full complete video on this that I'll link at the end of this video if you're interested in that. Now, regardless of the initiating cause of male pattern baldness, we do know that DHT is the prime mover when it comes to initiating hair loss in the scalp. And because of this, the primary way of preventing this from happening is to specifically prevent the conversion of testosterone into DHT in the scalp, either through pharmaceutical means or through natural means. And because this channel is more geared towards natural means of accomplishing various health goals, that's what we're going to be talking about for the rest of this video, is natural means to prevent the conversion of testosterone into DHT, specifically in the scalp. Now, the first natural compound that I want to talk about is rosemary oil. And the reason I want to talk about this one first is because it is one of the only natural substances that has any real good clinical evidence as to its effects on male pattern baldness. Now, interestingly enough, rosemary oil was compared to minoxidil in this specific study, and it found that rosemary actually performed just as well as minoxidil. Now, there is an argument to be made that the specific concentration of minoxidil in this specific study wasn't up to par with what is typically used. However, the flip side of this is that you can always just simply increase the concentration of rosemary oil as well to get the same benefits as what you would get from a 5% minoxidil treatment. So I do think rosemary oil is a fairly promising natural supplement that can be directly applied to the scalp for the purpose of preventing or even possibly reversing male pattern baldness. Now, I do think there is a very little chance that it would actually reverse male pattern baldness, but it might be a good option to leverage in order to help slow the process down. Now, the mechanisms of action here appear to be several different mechanisms as outlined here, as well as some other studies, and it does appear to be related to the ability of rosemary oil to potently inhibit the 5-alpha reductase enzyme. but there may also be some component of an anti-inflammatory property, which would also kind of prevent the downstream effects of DHT in the scalp. But rosemary oil also appears to be involved in the IGF-1 pathway as well as the antioxidant pathway, all of which appear to have some level of effect on preventing hair loss. Now, when it comes to the practical application of rosemary oil, as well as most of the other compounds that we'll talk about in this video, you have a couple of different options. One is just to simply apply the undiluted oil directly to the scalp and kind of just massage it into the scalp and allow it to do its thing. Or you can do what I do, which is to simply just put a few drops of it into your shampoo and allow it to sit for 10 to 15 minutes while you're in the shower, and then just simply rinse it out when you're done. Now, there isn't a ton of research on the perfect way to apply it, and maybe you want to do both of those if you want to. However, just in general, applying rosemary oil several times per week may be a good option when it comes to preventing hair loss. Now, the second one I want to talk about is another essential oil, which I kind of sound like a kook even talking about essential oils, but is peppermint oil. And peppermint oil, kind of like rosemary oil, has some decent research when compared to minoxidil that it may actually improve symptoms of hair loss. Now, the mechanisms here appear to be slightly different than rosemary oil, where rosemary oil appears to be a direct inhibitor of the 5-alpha reductase enzyme as well as other mechanisms. Peppermint oil appears to be more responsible for an increase in circulation and IGF-1 in the scalp. And so there is a little bit of evidence to suggest that peppermint oil might lower testosterone levels. However, that probably doesn't have any practical application when it comes to topical application to the scalp. But nonetheless, peppermint oil does also appear to be effective at improving symptoms of male pattern baldness. Now, the third and fourth that I want to talk about are, I'm just going to kind of lump them together simply because I don't personally use them. I do personally use rosemary and peppermint, but I do not use these even though they do have some decent research as to their effect on hair regrowth and the prevention of hair loss, and that is pumpkin seed oil and saw palmetto. Now, both of these do appear to inhibit the 5-alpha reductase enzyme, and specifically with saw palmetto, it does appear to inhibit both isoforms, both the first and the second isoform of 5-alpha reductase. And so it is thought that via this mechanism, both of these oils and natural compounds can inhibit the 5-alpha reductase in the scalp when directly applied, and therefore decrease the risk of hair loss. Now, it is probably worth noting here that if you are super dedicated to keeping your hair and you're experiencing symptoms of hair loss at a very young age, some of these methods are probably going to be good at slowing the process down. However, at some point, genetics is probably going to take over. Now, maybe some of these options might prevent or slow the process down to the point where you're like 40 or 50 and you just don't care that your hair falls out anymore. But more than likely, if you are super dedicated to keeping your hair and you're already losing it at a younger age, pharmaceuticals is probably going to be one of your only options to effectively actually keep your hair. Now, aside from these four options, there are also things like lavender and caffeine and onion juice and garlic juice and even fenugreek oil and pine tar and zinc that do have at least some preliminary evidence in rodents to suggest that they could prevent hair loss or even possibly reverse hair loss. However, these supplements are vastly understudied and don't have any clinical evidence behind them, and so it's kind of hard to recommend them. But again, if you're like super committed to keeping your hair and you're trying to like create the perfect cocktail of just juices and oils to put on your hair, you might smell really, really bad. However, combining some of these together might be a good option to at least slow the progression of male pattern baldness. Now, if you haven't seen my full breakdown on how to optimize testosterone levels, make sure to check out this video here as well as the description for all the cool products that I'm affiliated with. But other than that, I will see you guys next time.